Good evening and welcome to our notes on trouble in Jamestown. Tonight's inquiry question is, describe the problems Jamestown faced and how they overcame these problems. Get out a piece of notebook paper and set up your Cornell notes at this time. If you need to pause the video, do so now. To start, Jamestown was set up by a company called the Virginia Company. They were a joint stock company or a private trading company owned by many people. A joint stock company is a company where many people put money in to the company and they each own some stocks, similar to what we have as the stock market today. If the company was to make profit, each person that owns part of the company would equally split the profit that they make based on how much stock they own in the company. The Virginia Company was willing to pay for settlers to come to America in hopes that they would find gold and be able to send it back to England, and there would be the profit that they wanted. The settlers that came were willing to come for the jobs. They were hoping to have work. The first thing the Virginia Company had to do, though, is they had to raise the money to pay for the ships and pay for all the necessary equipment to be able to go to an unknown land and start a new colony. The colony they set up, it was called Jamestown. Jamestown was first founded in 1607, and it's the first successful colony in America. Prior to Jamestown, we had Roanoke, who the colonists disappeared from the time people left it and then came back from Europe, and then they were vanished. To this day, we don't know exactly what happened to those colonists. Jamestown starts out in 1607, and as we're going to look over the next few minutes, they have many troubles. So the four big problems that they faced in Jamestown in the early years was poor health, poor governance, the work ethic of the colonists, and the bad relationships with Native Americans. So if we start with the health, the land in Jamestown was swampy, which is ripe for mosquitoes, so mosquitoes are everywhere. If you know much about mosquitoes, mosquitoes carry disease and spread disease very rapidly if the disease is there. The drinking water was very poor at this time in Jamestown. They're going through one of the worst droughts that the continent has faced in almost 700 years. The James River is really low, so it had quite a bit of salt water in it. If you drink salt water, it can dehydrate your body, and this is what happened to a lot of the colonists, is they would drink this water and their body would just become so dehydrated they couldn't live anymore. And then disease spread very quickly because they didn't have the modern healthcare of the time in the colony. And by the time they could get back to Europe, they wouldn't make it alive. The second reason for trouble in the early years of Jamestown is very poor governance. The Crown in England set up a council of 13 men. However, this council just quarreled. They argued and got very little done. If there's no government to set laws for the people, set guidelines, it turns into chaos within the colony. Next is the work ethic. The colonists in Jamestown, they were more interested in hunting for gold instead of planting crops. They get there and the first thing they do is they go look for gold. By the time winter comes, they hadn't planted any crops, they were running out of food, and you can't buy food with the gold that they find, plus they didn't really find any gold. John Smith, who comes a couple years later, says that all he sees is no talk, no hope, nor work from any of the colonists. They didn't have hope, they weren't working. All they wanted to do is go find the riches and find the gold. And a fourth, but certainly not last, thing that caused trouble is the settlers did not get along with the Native Americans at first. Settlers were killed. They were trying to defend themselves against the Indians. They didn't go out and try to develop relationships with Indians. They didn't trade with Indians, so they weren't able to use the wisdom of the Indians to learn how to plant crops in this area. And this caused that food shortage. From 1607 to the late 16 teens, so around 1618, 1619, it's called a time called the starving time. The colonists run out of food. They aren't being successful. The colony's almost dying. However, it turns around. There's four big reasons for their success. We have John Smith comes to the colony. Tobacco is discovered and planted. A new form of government is instituted, and women come and settle the colony. So let's first start with John Smith. He may be the thing that started all the others into action. He develops relationships with the Native Americans, which opens trade. They're able to start to learn how to plant food in the area, to gain food, get the resources they needed for things that will work in Jamestown. He sets rules for the colonists. If you remember, one of the problems was they weren't working. They just wanted to go find gold. So John Smith said, if you don't work, you're not eating. This got the colonists to get working. And he also explored the surrounding areas. John Rolfe, shortly after, a colonist in Jamestown, he discovers that tobacco grows really well in the area. He discovers this because of the Native Americans and his relationship he builds with the Native Americans. Demand in Europe grew, and this became the source of income for the colony. It's called a cash crop, a crop that will bring in lots of money. So the colony went from being very poor because they weren't finding the gold, they didn't have any other resources, to now being able to make lots of money to sustain itself and constantly being able to sell back to Europe what they needed. In 1619, so about 12 years after the colony first was set up, the House of Burgesses is created. This is the first representative government in America. A representative government is where you elect people to go make the laws for you. This is just like what we have today, where we elect people to the House of Representatives or the Senate, and they make our laws for us. We don't make our own laws. They met as an assembly, and this comes back from old English tradition and history from the Magna Carta in the 1200s of a representative government. The colonists in Jamestown didn't want to be ruled by one person. They wanted to have some say in what their laws were going to be. And the final reason that led to success was women. In 1619, about 100 women are sent to Virginia to, quote, make the men more settled. Most of the original settlers were men, single men, young men who were just out to look for the gold, make it rich. They weren't there to have a family. They weren't there to settle down and make the colony successful. They were there for themselves. Shortly after, most of the women quickly found husbands, and this started to change the culture of Jamestown. It became more settled. The men were changing to become family men instead of just out for themselves and out for the gold and out for the riches. They were there to actually help the colony become successful. So that's our notes tonight on Jamestown. Concluding question that I want you to think about is, which reason for success do you think was most significant or most important? We'll discuss this tomorrow in class. Have a good evening.